So now it's time to set up our backend. I closed everything out and I went back into the e-commerce folder instead of this front-end folder. So our Django project will sit side by side with front-end. So if I open up e-commerce here, we are going to create our Django project side by side here, and we are going to have a folder called front-end, and the Django project will be called backend. So that's going to sit side by side here. So before we get everything installed, I just want to explain how it's going to work. So we are not going to set up our database right away. What we are going to do is we are going to set up our Django project, and then we are going to create our API with dummy data. And from the front end, we are going to make calls to that API. So the data is still going to be that static data, but we are going to be able to make the API calls and see how the front end and back end work. Now, once we configure that, once we set up the Django REST framework, we are going to we are actually going to create the database and then start rendering out real data. So before we get started, what we need to do is we first need to set up our virtual environment. So our virtual environment will also sit in this folder. Once we activate that, that's when we can go ahead and start installing Django. So a quick recap on our virtual environment. You probably should already know this, but essentially it just lets us keep all of our imports and installs within one environment rather than keeping that globally. So if we have Django on our computer, maybe another version of it, a project relies on a um, so let's say Django 2.2 and now we are using 3.2. So this environment is going to let us keep our imports and installs in different areas. So just to give you a quick example of why we need this and how this works, I am just going to do pip list, and this is going to show me a list of all the packages and dependencies I have installed globally. So I don't want to use all of these for my project. I want to keep my project separate, so we are going to set this up with a virtual environment. So I'm going to install virtual environment, and you can set it up in different ways, but this is what I am going to use. So I already have it installed. Let it install, give it a second, and then once we have that, I'm going to clear my terminal with CLS, and now I can set up my virtual environment from my e-commerce folder. So make sure you are in here and then just do virtual environment and then whatever we want to call our environment. So let's just do my env, so this can be named whatever you want. I'm just going to keep this convention, and now we have our environment set up. So you are going to see this folder right here. So if I open up my e-commerce folder, it's sitting right next to front end. So my env, and then we have our front end right there. So let's go ahead and from here, let's activate our environment. So still from the e-commerce folder, we can activate that by just doing my env, whatever the name is, uh, backslash script and then activate. So I'm not sure how this is going to work on Mac. Just look it up. It can't be too different from this. And once we see this, this means that our environment is now active. And if I run pip list again, we are going to see a lot less dependencies here. So we are going to see pip setup tools and wheel. And in here, what I want to do is first pip install Django, and this is going to give us the latest version of Django. Okay, so now that Django finished installing, we can use the Django admin start project command, and we just need to give our project a name. So I'm going to call this backend. So this is kind of like that create a react app command. So from our e-commerce folder, make sure we are running it from here, and let's go ahead and create that. So this is going to give us our boilerplate files. So now we see a backend folder, and we have our Django files here. So our settings.py or manage.py, if we go into here, you probably should know most of these uh, right now. But we have our settings.py file, which is kind of like that package.json file in React folder. So basically all of our dependencies, our main configurations will be right here. So let's go ahead and start up our server. So this is the equivalent of npm start with React. We are just going to do python manage.py run server. So I just forget I need to cd into my backend folder, then we'll do. So cd backend, and that's where we need to call it from. So e-commerce backend. Now I can run server, and this is going to turn on my server on port 8000 by default. So you can copy that. What I have, I just go ahead and pin that here. So I pin it here, right here. So I have my port 3000 for React and port 8000 for Django. So if everything went right, if you are running your server, this is the default application that uh, Django gives us. So we can actually run our application, and here is a boilerplate project. So we want to start customizing this, and we want to start building out our API. So let's go ahead and configure our first app. So if I hit Control C, I can turn off my server, killing that process. And what I want to do now is start building out our apps. So if you know the concept of Django and how Django works, Django puts our project into multiple apps. So for example, our products would be in one app, and this just helps separate our files. Our let's say users would be in another app. So normally you separate your project into different apps. In this case, what I am going to do is create one app, because we just want one API, and it's not going to be that big. So to create that, let's make sure we are in our backend folder, and we are going to do python manage.py. and we are going to do start app, and then we need to give our app a name. So it's kind of like that Django start project command, and this will also create some boilerplate files for us for our first app. So in our app we are going to work with views.py. This is where we handle the business logics. We have our models.py file. This is where we are going to create our database, and what we need to do is tell our project about our app. So right now our backend folder here, our project does not know that this app exists. This app just exists inside of it, but we need to configure it in settings.py, and we need to point our project with installed apps. We need to let it know that this app exists. So we are going to say base, which is the name of our app. We are going to go into the apps folder. So within base, and right here we have our app.py file. We want to point to the config class right here. So we are going to do base.apps, base.config, and then let's add a comma, and now our project knows about our app. So if we run our server now, we are not going to, at least I don't think we will get that default Django page until we start messing with the URLs. But our app is now ready and we can start configuring a few things. So let's configure our URLs first and create some routing here. So in our app, let's go into views.py, and we want to create a function here, and we are going to be using function based views instead of classes. So the reason why I am using function based views instead of classes, a lot of people ask me about this. This is because function based views allow me to show all of the logic right within the view, while classes, they are very helpful and very useful. So I recommend for people that are little bit more expert level or understand how things work to use uh, those, because function based views we can see everything, classes we can't. And it's kind of like this magic box. So I just prefer it because it's easier for beginners and I can explain exactly what's going on. So we'll just create our first view, and we are going to call this get routes. So the first view we are going to get is just going to tell us what routes we have and how our API is going to look. So we want to pass in the request object there, and we want to return back a JSON response. So let's go ahead and import that. So we'll import that from Django.http import JSON response. So that's going to be a capital J and a capital R. And when we trigger this view, we are just going to get back some text here. So let's just start by saying hello with JSON response. We need to pass in shape, and we are going to set that to false. So now what we need to do is configure our URLs to actually know when to trigger this view, because uh, we are going to have multiple views. This is going to be called get routes, but later on we are going to have a view for our products. So depending on what the URL is, we need to know to return product. Maybe we need to return back some user data or orders. So in order to actually configure our views and actually trigger URLs with them, what we need to do uh, is create a urls.py file, and this file is in charge of connecting the views to URLs. So from here, let's just go ahead and import from Django.path, or actually from Django.urls, and let's import the path function. Now we also want to import our views. So because they sit in the same folder, we are able to do from dot and then import views. So remember, they are sitting right here. We have our urls.py file and our views. Now the main part of this file here is going to be this URLs patterns, and this is just going to be a list of URLs. So the first view we want to trigger, we want to be able to trigger whenever we just go back to that home page or the base URL. So we can just leave that blank. Maybe in the future this would say something like products forward slash, and then that would be a path. But for our home page, we are just going to leave it like that, and then we can just do views, and then we can specify the view that we want. So we are just going to trigger the get routes view, and we can also name our URLs. So we will not really need this, but just because I'm used to this, we are going to leave it that way. So we are going to give our view a name, and we need to add a comma. So this is not going to work just yet. So if I start up my server, let's go ahead and just say run server. This is not going to work because our URL patterns, and this should be patterns like uh, that. This is not configured to our, it's not configured to our base app here. So it's still the default application. So what we need to do is we need to tell our app here. So our Django project in backend, we also have another urls.py file. So we need to tell this file whenever we enter the home page, go ahead and send the traffic here. And let this file take care of everything. So for this we are going to need the include function, and all we need to do is just say path, and then we are going to leave it like that, because it's the home URL, and we are going to say include, and we are going to point it to base. So that's the name of our app, and we want this to point to the urls.py file. So now let's add a comma here. Whenever we enter this, we should get back hello. So that's our first view. And this is how the URL routing system works. This should just be a refresher for you. For Django, you should probably already know this, but if somebody is newer, just wanted to make sure you understand this, and that's our basic URL routing system. So let's actually return back some routes and go over these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in something that I have on my computer, and we'll just fix that indentation. And instead of returning back this hello message, we want to return back the actual routes. So what I can do is I can pass routes into here, and now we'll get back this ingestion response here. So these are all the routes we are going to work with here. So this is just going to be for our products. We'll have more route than this, but later on we are just going to do something like this. So this is going to the convention. We are going to do API, and then product will return back an array of products. Now when we want to return back a single product, we'll just do API products and then pass in uh, the product ID, and we have a lot more URLs for creating, updating, and deleting. So we also do this for orders, users, and different items in our API. So because I want to follow this convention, let's actually go back into our base URLs file, and we are just going to say API forward slash. So now we can't just go to the base URL anymore in order to get this. And if this gives you an error, we are not really going to be working with this routing system anyways. Because we are just going to be making API calls. Just let it be like that. Let it return the error, but just make sure you are from now on getting API, and then it will actually give us that base routing system. So the first thing I want to do is connect the route for products. So I want to be able to do API and then products here. So right now we don't get anything, and what I want to do is actually use a fake data for products. So what we had in our back front end, I want to actually turn that into a Python file and return that with an API call. So let's try that right now. So from here we can go into front end, and let's go into source, and let's copy product. .js. So I'm just going to click Control C, and we just have this array, and I'm going to remove our base URLs file. And let's go into back, and in our app let's paste it in here, and so product.js should sit right here, and that doesn't look right because it's a JavaScript file. So let's go ahead and turn this into a Python file, and then we'll need to fix up a few things. So we'll change that into a .py file, and we need to make sure that this is a dictionary now, so we can get rid of const Python doesn't know what that is, and we also need to get rid of this export. So now this is a Python dictionary. So when we pass this into our view .json, response will actually turn it into JSON data. So we have our products.py file sitting in our backend within our base file, and so in our views we can actually start using the products from that list right there. So let's start by just doing from products, and we want to import that products list. So we are just going to do products, and let's create a view to actually return this information. So let's just minimize there, and so let's go ahead and create another function based view, and we'll just call this get products, and later uh, on we will actually query the database and get real products from this view. But for now we just want to return back this data, so we'll just do return JSON response, and we are going to take in products. So that's important. We'll pass that in here, and we'll just say save, and that equals to false. So we want to use this view. So what I am going to do is add another path here. So we'll take in get products, we'll change this up right here, and now we are just going to do products, and we'll add a forward slash, and we'll also name the view that to. So now whenever we type in this route, we are going to trigger the products view, and we should get back list of product. So let's open that up here, and in our API, now we'll do API forward slash products. So there we go. Now we get back a list of data here, and we are just returning back a list of products with a JSON response. So at this point, all we are doing is just using a JSON response, but we are not really using the uh, power of what the Django REST framework can give us. So Django is the framework. Django REST framework is something we can use for setting up our APIs. So we actually need to pip install this, and this makes our API much more powerful. So we are going to pip install it, we'll add it into our application, and you will just be able to see uh, the difference between returning back a simple JSON response and then what we can actually do with the Django REST framework. So let's go ahead and start by creating that install here. So we'll just do pip install Django REST framework, and once this is installed, all we need to do import it into installed apps. So we are just going to copy that right there, and we are going to go back into settings.py. Let's go into back and settings.py, and I will paste that right here. So make sure there is a comma there, and now we have the Django REST framework installed. So let's see the difference here. Right now we are using this JSON response, but we are going to use something from the Django REST framework now. So in API guide, I can go into here, and remember we are going to be using class or function based views instead of class based views. So there is instruction how to use both, but we are going to stick to the function based views. And for this, what we are going to do is we are first going to import from REST framework dot decorators import API view. So we are going to add that here, and that will be just above products. And we also want to import response here from Django. So instead of using or from Django's REST framework, we also want to import response. So instead of just doing a simple JSON response, this actually gives us a whole just a lot more uh, power to for our routes here. So it lets us do a lot more. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll say API view, and in here what we need to do is we need to pass in a list for the methods that we can flow. So for this, the only method that we are going to allow is going to be get, but if later on we want it to allow post methods, we can do something like that. So we can say post put, and there we can also do delete. And then I'm not sure if there is any other ones there, but we are going to stick to this, and let's uh, use response instead of JSON response. So if we remove save now, and let's see the difference here. So we are going to go back to our API, and now we get back this response. So when we call the data from, let's say when we are using JavaScript in the future, it's not going to see the difference. But now we actually get the UI, and it formats our data here. So we are actually able to change the methods depending on what's allowed. So we can make this into simple JSON data, and this really gives us a whole bunch of uh, more power here. So I would highly recommend looking into the REST framework if you haven't really used it, but it lets us do a lot here. So if we wanted to use response for our products here, let's just try this. And so if we just take out save, and we are try using the products here, let's go into products, and it's going to give us an error. The reason why is because this will only work, this response will only work once we have this decorator. So let's just start adding this decorator to every view for now. So we'll just say API underscore view, and the method that we want to allow here is going to be get. So in a list, we all just say get, and let's see what we get back here. So there we go. And now that looks a lot better. So it's all formatted and we have this UI. We can also work with the methods here. So from here, what I want to do is actually return back a single product. So later on, what we type in this URL, we type in product ID. Let's say the ID is 4, and I want to get back a single product rather than this list of products. So for a product page, when we are calling our API, we need to return back maybe data for a single product. So let's go ahead and configure uh, that right here. So in our views, let's go ahead and copy and paste this one right here, and we will change that to uh, get product, and with request we need to pass in some more parameter, and I'm going to call that pk, and we want to return back a single product. So let's just create a variable, and for now we'll just call it product none. So to configure this URL, let's go ahead and set this up right here. And we will change this to product, and we'll also remove as right there and get the get product view. So we need to pass in just like we did with our routing system in React. We need to pass in a dynamic value. So we just say string, and this can be integer, it can be a slug field, but for now we are just going to say string, and we need to give it a name. So just like we named it ID before, I'm going to name this pk because Python has a I believe there's a function called id, so we are going to say pk for primary key. And what we need to do is loop through this array of products here, and we need to find the product that has the ID that matches this. So if we go into our products dictionary, so let's go into products.py. We need to get it by this value right here. So we'll just say for I in products, and then we'll just say if I, and because this is a dictionary, we have to do it like uh, this. We'll just say underscore ID. So if the product ID matches pk, so the primary key that we just passed into the URL, let's go ahead and set the product to whatever product is in that current iteration. So we'll set the product to I, and then we'll just break. So now that we have this, that should get a product here, it should return it, and then we have the URL routing system. So let's close that out. Now all we need to do, and actually I just realized that needs to be products, and then we pass in the ID. So let's go ahead and add that. Type an ID of 1. We get back the products with the ID of 1. Let's just do 6, and then there we go. So now we are actually able to find a product, and this will change once we add the database. If we go to 10, we don't have product with that ID and we get back nothing. So that's it for this. So what we want to do now is go into the front end and actually start making these API calls and returning not real data but data from our API in our React project.